never before done this format on the promises, so this is a work in progress. Please bear with us. What we like to do for a session like this is to cultivate a discussion. Yeah. We're not here as experts on a damn thing. What we consider is that the important thing on something like this is not to come with the right answers, but the right questions, and to get a discussion going with you. So in that vein, please understand a couple of things. First of all, that this is not a sharing meeting. This is an environment where we want give and take. So the crosstalk rule is not so rigorously adhered to in this environment. We may break in to ask for clarity or to introduce a new idea, and please don't be offended if we have to cut you off in order to accomplish that, because we are trying to cover a lot of points in the process here. Anyone add that?
No, I think that's pretty good.
Okay. We do have, for the purpose of these sessions, we have a little bit of an introduction on the theory that not everybody who's here today is going to be who's at future sessions. So we'd like to just make sure that we establish a little bit upfront about what it is that we're trying to do. So the first time many of us heard CODA's 12 promises was in our first CODA meeting. Others may have found the promises when we stumbled across a CODA website, or a friend may have shared them with us to let us know what they found in CODA. Wherever we first heard these 12 remarkable statements, most of us had a visceral reaction to them. Some of us found hope. Maybe this is possible for me too. Others may have been skeptical. These promises are nonsense. I'm far too damaged. This could never happen to me. Whatever our reaction is, we came back to CODA meetings and applied the program to our lives and began to experience some or all of the CODA promises, sometimes without even noticing at the time. For some of us, they've come gradually, growing little by little over a period of time. Others have experienced them suddenly. We awoke one day to the realization that we feel different, that we are experiencing freedom and exhibiting an integrity and dignity that we never had before. Often, it's only after we see these changes in other CODA members that we notice them in ourselves, and we realize that we've changed in the very same ways. The one constant that we see is that CODA members who actively work the 12 steps and apply themselves to practicing the 12 traditions do see the promises fulfilled in their lives. The purpose of this series is to explore CODA's 12 promises. We will discuss not only how many of us experience the promises in our lives, but also how we can use them as additional tools to further enhance our recovery from the disease of codependence. So the way we're going to structure this is that each session I'll kind of take the lead on discussion about one of the promises, and Karen will take the lead on the other, but we'll both participate as we go. And we're going to start with promise one, and my sheet of paper just went away on. Okay. Promise one. I know a new sense of belonging, the feeling that emptiness and loneliness will disappear. Many CODA members describe intense feelings, sometimes lifelong ones of alienation. Some talk about feeling as if they were dropped off as babies by aliens. Others talk about feeling lonely, separate, different, and afraid. Still others describe the inability of feeling loved or feeling valued, even when they know intellectually that they are loved and valued. These feelings often provoke a sense of emptiness and a profound loneliness that follows codependents throughout their lives. Such feelings may be the prime motivator for many of the patterns and characteristics of codependence. CODA's Promise 1 suggests that we will recover from these feelings and enjoy a new sense of belonging. Often, this is the first promise we experience, sometimes at our very first meeting. The warm welcome and unconditional acceptance we experience as newcomers can sometimes penetrate our misery and our denial to suggest we finally found someplace to belong. For some, the sense of belonging becomes even more concrete when we get involved in CODA service. Whether at the group, intergroup, voting entity, or conference level, service work provides us the opportunity to connect with other recovering codependents. For many, this sense of belonging is also enhanced by sponsorship. We experience the love and acceptance of that our sponsor has provided us. Then we consider the love we feel for a sponsee who has placed their trust in us and the satisfaction we feel in watching that sponsee's growth. In the midst of these considerations, it is easy to feel that we are part of a greater whole, a chain of recovery in which we are a single link, or a river in which we are part of the flow. We realize that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. I just saw the message asking where that's from. This is from a draft booklet that is being prepared on the promises. So it's not CoDA conference endorsed literature, although it's going to be submitted for that purpose. What comes out of these discussions will probably have a lot to do with shaping what the final product looks like. So we thank you for participating. When I look at Promise One myself, I walked into that first CoDA meeting with a lifelong history of feeling lonely, separate, different, and afraid. One of the terms that you hear in CoDA periodically, in fact, I just ran across it in the literature last night, is terminal uniqueness. I feel different from everybody else. I feel so unique that it's killing me. That was me walking into that first meeting. That conviction all my life that I'm just out of step. Going through my life, watching the people around me really, really closely, trying to anticipate what they're going to do next. So I can do it so closely behind them that it seems like I did it with them, because I just want to be part of it. What that meant for me is that I walked into that first CoDA meeting in enough pain that I was open to a new idea. We talk here about identify, don't compare. At my first meeting, I heard people talking about my life. But I've shared many times that I stood frozen in the doorway of that first meeting before I walked in, looking at 6 of the scariest looking women I'd ever seen in my life. And not very long before had I found myself in that situation, all I would have seen there was the differences. I needed to be in enough pain in order to hear a new idea, in order to hear them talking about the stuff that they'd been through, that when I thought about it was exactly what I'd been through. I mean, some details differ, but the feelings are always the same. And because of that, suddenly just a little bit I could feel a part of. What's happened for me is over the time that I have been in Codependents Anonymous, that feeling of being part of has done nothing but grow. And other elements of the CoDA program have softened that need on my part, that desperation to belong. That was the thing that was always the problem, was I was desperate to belong. And one of the things that we tell newcomers here is that if you are desperate for a relationship of any kind, you are absolutely guaranteed not to have a healthy one. That's what I got for the moment. You?
Well, very much like Ritchard, when I first got into program, I felt terminally unique. I really believed that no one possibly understand what was going on in my mind, in my heart. And that if you knew what was going on in my mind and my heart, if you truly could see me, then I would be rejected. I really didn't think that somebody could look at me and the whole me, understand and accept me the way I was. So when I came into program and I heard other people sharing my feelings, my experiences in different words, because they weren't exactly my experiences. I mean, we all have our own backstories, but it was the feelings surrounding those stories. And for the first time, it's like, oh my goodness, you know, maybe there's something that I can do differently. Maybe there's hope here. That idea that if these people here could work their way through and laugh at some of the things I was still crying over, you know, maybe there was a sense of hope for me. That was my biggest thing when I first came into program, was maybe I'm not terminally unique. That gave me just that spark of hope to come back again, because I had no intention, to tell you the truth, but it gave me that idea that maybe something could be different.
So, you know, we walk into that first meeting, and frankly, for those of you who are new, we're going to pull back the curtain a little bit and let you in on some secrets. We engineer those meetings to make you feel like you belong. You know, what do we do when there's a newcomer in the meeting? We share our experience, strength, and hope. Why we came and why we keep coming back. That idea that's so important in these rooms, that if your problem looks like my problem, the thing that worked for you might work for me. And so we want to share our backstories with that newcomer as an opportunity for identification. I got here feeling, as we've said, unique. Nobody else ever felt the way I feel. Nobody else has had the same crazy thoughts that I've had. Nobody's made the same stupid mistakes that I've made, because I'm unique, you know. And I found myself in a room full of people who were all unique the same way. And that opened the door. Tradition 3 talks about how the only requirement for membership in CoDA is a desire for healthy and loving relationships. If you want those, you're in. That's all you need to belong here. You don't have to work the steps. You don't have to get a sponsor. You don't have to practice the traditions. You don't even have to admit you're codependent. Now, if you want to get better, we do recommend that you do all of those things, but you don't have to in order to belong here. We want to make it as easy as possible to belong. Tradition 8 talks about how that newcomer comes in and we're going to help them for fun and for free. We're not professionals here. We're not looking for compensation. We're not trying to get anything out of the newcomer. We're doing it simply because it helps our own recovery to be loving. So that's some background on Promise One. I'd like to kind of open things up a little bit for discussion. So what we've done is we prepared a series of discussion questions. We'll see how many of them we get through before we have to have a break and then go on to Promise 2. So for starters, do I remember that feeling of emptiness and loneliness? What kind of behaviors was I drawn to because of that feeling? You remember before you got here, that feeling of emptiness and loneliness? What was that like, and what did you do? What kind of trouble did it get you into? Yeah, when we look at the patterns of codependence that we read to newcomers, I think for me in particular, the control patterns and the compliance patterns were driven by these feelings. The idea that codependents have to be needed in order to have a relationship with others. I felt lonely and different and afraid and knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that all of you were looking for a reason to discard me. But if I make myself essential to you, you can't throw me away. Under the compliance patterns, codependents compromise their values and integrity to avoid rejection and other people's anger. You know, I have values. Honestly, I have values. I know it's wrong to lie and cheat and steal, but you know, if that's what it takes to avoid your disapproval, I become a liar, a thief, and a cheat. And It's not even a conscious decision. It just happens. I think that happens for a lot of us, that feeling of emptiness and loneliness, when it becomes acute, we're paralyzed. Sometimes with self-pity, sometimes we go numb, but we become paralyzed.
One of the things I did a lot was isolate and just kept myself apart from other people. And there is a difference between, of course, isolation and solitude. And mine was stepping over the line huge. I isolated.
I identify when you talk about not remembering that first meeting, Michael. In the beverage division, they talk about blackouts from drinking. And it's like, I go, big deal. I didn't have to drink to have blackouts. I got long periods of time where I was so in my head that I had no clue what was going on around me and no recollection of those times. So as we go along here, we're going to periodically, even if we have a bunch of hands raised, we're going to need to change directions. And this is one of those times, but I think those that have their hands up won't mind too much. There's a little passage from the CoDA Blue Book. At our first meeting, we listened to people talk about their struggles and how their lives have changed from working a program of recovery. We hear of relationships healing, those with ourselves, our higher power, and others. We learn how we can experience freedom and an inner peace. We listen with wonder as they seem to be telling our stories, describing our problems, and talking about our most secret feelings. This may be one of the few times we don't feel strange or alone. So I'd like to modify the existing question on the floor and ask, do you remember that first time when you felt like maybe you belonged? When was that? How did that feel? That's my experience, though, in how my codependency works. I don't know what its purpose or why it raises its goal, but it seems to want to separate me from the people around me, so that ultimately I die alone in the dark. I don't know what the point of all that is, but that's the effect that my codependency has in my life and what it seems to want to do. And what seems to help is a program of recovery that works in direct counteraction to the effects of that illness. Everything that we do in CoDA is about making my world a little bit bigger. Do you remember when that moment was that you suspected maybe you belonged? I saw the note. It is asking if we can take a 10-minute break now, so we will come back in 10 minutes, wrap up on Promise 1 and transition to Promise 2. We tend to move in the direction that we're looking. Tradition 3, it says that the only requirement for membership in CoDA is a desire for healthy and loving relationships. Opens the door. When I think about that, I belong here because that's what I want. But I can also apply that to any other situation. If in my job, I am there qualified to do the things that I'm doing, and I'm paying attention to the things that they hired me for, I belong there. In my marriage, if I am doing the things that we have agreed are required in order to be participants in this relationship, I belong here, and I can cultivate that feeling. What about you? What tools of recovery help you in feeling that sense of belonging? One that you had buried in the middle there that I think is often overlooked is that idea of keeping a lid on our expectations. I've learned in recovery to try to convert my expectations to preferences, so that instead of unmet expectations, I have failed preferences. And that makes a big difference in my serenity level. What I'm kind of getting out of the conversation that we've had so far is the importance of meetings and the fact that being at the meetings and being welcomed, I feel like I belong, but that's got a ripple effect outward. Because I've got that one place that I can belong, it opens the doors for me to belong somewhere else and somewhere else and somewhere else. So I think that's part of the power of attending CoDA meetings in our lives. One tool that I want to finish out on that is really important for me in that sense of belonging is the sponsorship, both having a sponsor and being a sponsor. The guys that I get the privilege of helping reinforce for me the fact that I'm part of this thing. And I'm still codependent as hell. Every once in a while, my head starts eating me alive. And that's the time when it's so important that I have somebody that I can call who can talk me off the ledge and help me out of that dark place. And that's what my sponsor does for me. My sponsor, I love to say this when he's in the room, my sponsor is a really big tool. Okay, with that said, let's move on to Promise 2.
Sure.
Karen's in charge now.
Okay, Promise 2. So for those of you who have just joined us and didn't catch the little blurb we did at the beginning, we were asked, what are we reading from? And what I'm about to read from is a work in progress. So it isn't printed literature. So it's not something that you're going to be able to specifically find. So Promise 2, I am no longer controlled by my fears. I overcome my fears and act with courage, integrity, and dignity. Promise 2 is built on an assumption that some of us may have resisted as newcomers, that codependence is an illness built on fear. As we progress in our recovery, we learn how true that assumption is. We learn that in the midst of our illness, we were often afraid of someone or for someone. We learn that fear is the bedrock on which our codependent patterns are based. In step 4, we examine our fears. You might find that we are afraid of criticism or other people's anger. Maybe we're afraid of ridicule. We may be afraid of excessive attention or of being ignored. Ultimately, we may realize that all of these stem from 2 core fears: fear of rejection and abandonment. We are afraid that others won't accept us, or that having appeared to have accepted us, they will now reject us. We also realize that these fears are founded on a lack of self-esteem. We don't consider ourselves worthy, so we naturally conclude that others see us the same way. In the process of working the steps, we face our fears and ask a loving higher power to release us from them. We gain self-esteem by performing esteem-worthy acts. The 12 traditions guide us in dealing with others from a place of equality and self-respect. At first, courage, integrity, and dignity may feel wrong. They may even feel fake. I'm not courageous or dignified, you may think. I have no integrity. But our sponsors guide us in applying the recovery tool of acting as if. We act as if when we do things that a courageous person would do, even if it terrifies us. We act as if when we do the things a person of integrity and dignity would do. We discover that less and less of our actions are driven by our fears. As we practice these new behaviors, as our fears loosen their grip on us, acts of courage, integrity, and dignity gradually begin to feel more natural to us. I really like this particular promise, that idea that we're no longer controlled by our fears. You know, to no longer be controlled by a fear or fears doesn't mean we don't feel them. There are a lot of times when I can still feel an awful lot of fear. But what the program does, and what this promise actually alludes to, is that I'm not controlled by that. I can feel that fear. And there's different tools in the program that have taught me, including my sponsor, how to feel the fear and do it anyway. That idea that, for me, this one comes to mind a lot. the idea that courage is fear that has said its prayers. I find that so important because I still get afraid. There are a lot of times when I do. And one of the important things for me to notice is how fear manifests in my own physical body, because it's a good indicator of what I'm feeling. I've noticed for myself that when I'm full of fear, all of a sudden I cannot breathe. I have a difficult time talking. My voice gets really, really low. My heart pounds like crazy, and I feel as though I'm going to die. And that used to happen on a fairly regular basis for me when faced with things within my relationship. When I came into program, that idea of, okay, there's an issue here. I don't, I need not blurt everything out, because sometimes the first thing that comes to my mind is exactly the wrong thing to say. Actually, frequently it's the wrong thing to say. I can say things poorly very, very quickly. And what I do is I damage relationships. And that's not the kind of person I want to be. So one of the things that I have been taught is to sit with the feeling. And when I have that coming up in my heart, I can sit with that feeling for a while and figure out what it is I need to say. And then prepare for the conversation by taking notes, by coming up, by bringing that down to a couple of key sentences, by talking it over with my sponsor, by getting clear. So that idea of feeling the fear and then having the conversation, inviting somebody into a conversation to have, right? And I remember one time having inviting Ritchard into a conversation, and now it was like I would have no problem saying that now, but when I first started practicing these things, I was absolutely terrified, just so scared, And it's okay, I know now what I need to say, and it seemed really small and trivial at first, but if something's small and trivial, but it keeps coming up again and again and again, it's important. So to be able to actually have that conversation, to face that fear, and to say what I need to say, even if I have my heart pounding and I can barely breathe, to have practiced it, to know that it's the right thing to do. And to do that it takes an awful lot of courage, and to say it with integrity and dignity rather than "you made me feel," which is always a bunch of bunk, right? I could say a lot on that, but that's where I'm going to leave my share on that, and let Ritchard share whatever is in his mind.
Well, first I want to comment on the irony that Karen would go into those situations somehow fearful of my anger or my rejection, because the reality of the situation is that I was at least that afraid of her anger and her rejection. And if anything, over the years in recovery, she's made more progress on that than I have. And I've made progress. What I can tell you is that Promise 2 is my favorite promise, and the one that I actually find the most useful on a day-to-day basis. I've learned that one of the most important questions I can ask myself is, Ritchard, what kind of man do you want to be? And at the end of the day, I want to be a man of courage, integrity, and dignity. I don't want to be controlled by my fears. And I note that this promise doesn't say your fears will go away. It just says that I will no longer be controlled by them. That idea that I'm still going to have fear. I am a creature of fear. But today I have other options than to surrender to that fear. And consequently, I get to make more choices that are consistent with the ideas of integrity and dignity. And I can use this promise in a situation, in a stressful situation, to notice my fear and to ask myself, okay, what would a man of integrity and dignity do in this situation? When a sponsee calls me and they are wrestling with a decision, that's often the question that I will go to with them. What do you think a man of integrity and dignity would do there? My sponsors taught me that that's one of the best techniques that I can use to help a sponsee find their solutions, is to ask them a question like that and let them supply their own answer. They don't need mine. So that's all I think I have to add.
Well, one more question is, have you prayed about it?
Oh, and have you prayed about it?
What does God say? Yeah. That's a big one as well. So with that, we're going to ask you guys a couple of questions and throw it back into your court. And we're going to put on my reading glasses so I can actually see the questions. Let's see. Let's start with this one. Which fears prevented me from acting with courage, integrity, and dignity? So,
what were you afraid of?
Yeah, what were you afraid of?
That is the solution to fear or the prescription that I was given, which is ask my higher power to remove the fear and go look for someone to help.
Absolutely. I used to refer to that, and I still do, as having the radio in my head that was turned to this negativity station that would say things like, you're ugly, stupid, you're dumb, you're incompetent. And if anybody finds out what's going on in your head, they're never going to love you. So it's such a common thing, feeling terminally unique, that I think that nobody else had that. And it's coming to meetings like this and using the tools of the program. And that's all we do. Absolutely.
It also speaks to the importance of self-talk in our recovery, because we move in the direction we're looking. So I've had to cultivate the ability to move away from the Ritchard, you idiot, you moron, you waste of skin, I can't believe you did that, you never do anything right, to, well, doesn't look like that's working, or gee, Ritchard, that was suboptimal. Let's do it different next time.
One of my favorites. That was suboptimal. It's kind of fun. That abandonment on the island. That seems to be the thing, is all of us will end up completely alone and we will die. I think it reinforces that idea that we are a pack animal at some level.
Well, that speaks to how codependents have problems with boundaries. That idea that you cannot set a boundary and look after someone else's feelings at the same time. And prior to recovery, I consistently wanted to look after their feelings because I needed to control and manipulate their feelings to make sure that they wanted to be with me. And that consequently, boundaries. What boundaries?
There's part of me that wants to say, so Ritchard, how did that work out for you?
Yeah.
But we won't go there today.
And I'm married to a crazy lady.
Yeah, but I'm the second one. Okay, so that being put aside now, what I'm kind of curious about, just I described to you the kind of fear, or when I feel fear, the type of feelings that I feel in my body. How do you know you're in fear? What's the manifestations that you actually feel? I think it's so important that we are able to identify our individual reactions to fear, because that gives us a heads up that we need to do something differently, so that we can actually pick up the tools of the program and move forward.
Yeah. Ellen talked about it when she said that her fear made up stories in her head. Right? My sponsor assures me that anytime my fears are in play, what that is my illness lying to me in order to control and manipulate my behavior. And the trick is to recognize the lie and embrace the truth.
I think that's all we have time for, actually.
Yeah.
It is 3:52, so unfortunately we won't be able to take any more responses, and we'll turn it back over to